pick up on some of those points with my guest, Katy, Washington editor at the Sunday Times, and Andrew Levi, a former diplomat who was based at the British Embassy in Moscow. Welcome to you both. And actually, both of you are joining us from Edinburgh in Scotland. But I know that you will both be very closely monitoring what is going to be happening in Washington throughout today. And Katy, obviously, the US President Donald Trump is saying that Volodymyr Zelensky could end this war right now. That would inevitably mean giving up territory, something that until now the Ukrainian president has been loath to do, saying it's against his constitution. But is he now in a position where parts of the Donbass will inevitably end up as Russian territory?
Well, that's a big question today, really. We know that Donald Trump, fresh from the Alaska summit on Friday, feels that he has made enough progress in his talks with Vladimir Putin, that there is the basis, the beginnings at least, of a comprehensive peace deal, as he might put it. Now we need to know whether what he believes counts as comprehensive peace gets near to Zelensky's definition of that. And we see on Truth Social, where Donald Trump likes to do lots of his announcements, he's talking about Crimea, that is gone. But I think what's far more controversial, to your point, is how do you freeze the conflict? And is it the case that Putin manages to claim parts of Ukraine that he hasn't yet fully conquered? That makes, I think, both Zelensky and some European leaders quite nervous. And I think what they will be looking to hear from today is what are these security pacts and security guarantees? That is effectively the softener in all this, which is if there are very strong security pacts with serious US involvement, perhaps that would be enough to make it easier to accept some of the more difficult compromises being put forward by the White House and Russia.
Andrew, on that point then, we were hearing Steve Witkoff describe this potential of an Article 5-like security guarantee without Ukraine being in NATO. The red line for Putin was always that Ukraine must not be allowed to join NATO. An Article 5-like security guarantee, what's your understanding of what that would mean? And what would that mean for Moscow? They're hardly going to accept that, are they?
It's very unclear. What we face in August 2025 is really very similar, it seems now, to September 1938 and Chamberlain and Munich. It looks like Zelensky is being coerced into giving up territory to an aggressor. Aggressive war is illegal under the UN Charter. That Russia is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It's not just bound to uphold the UN Charter, it's bound to enforce it. And yet it has broken every agreement it has ever had in respect of Ukraine. And President Putin won't stop unless he's stopped. So an Article 5-like guarantee, Article 5 being that part of the NATO treaty, which says that there'll be mutual aid from other NATO members if one NATO member is attacked, is very difficult to implement if you don't have the joint NATO headquarters and all the infrastructure of NATO to do it. The acceptance of Russia or otherwise ought to be irrelevant. The NATO guarantee is there for NATO. If we're going to put it in place for Ukraine, fine. But the underlying point is that President Putin has shown that he will never stop unless he is stopped by massive deterrence and by internal conditions in Russia, which eventually prevent him from being able to pursue his war.
It's an interesting point, Katy, that Andrew makes there. He won't stop until he is definitely stopped. But what potentially could that look like? Because we've seen over the years sanctions being imposed against Russia, and it doesn't seem to stop them with their pursuit of Ukraine. What does the stopping of President Putin potentially to you, Katy, look like?
Well, I think the way that the White House sees this is ultimately quite different to how many European leaders and Ukraine see it. And therefore, when you're speaking to figures in Washington, D.C. and those in the administration, those close to the administration, they will say, well, you have to take the world as it is, not as you want it to be. And they think that the best way to bring this conflict to an end is to effectively allow Russia to have some of the territory that it has already claimed. There's a question about where they go even further, but also to then incentivize Russia, I think, through almost bringing Russia in slightly from the cold with potentially, we hear about business deals, we hear about where America and Russia could work together on the economy. Now, obviously, there are lots of figures who are specialists in foreign policy looking on and seeing this as naive from the US president and the White House saying, oh, you can't do a business with Putin, he's just going to come back again. But I think that the way the president's looking at this is he likes to see himself as a deal maker. He would like to be a Nobel Peace Prize winner. And I think when it comes to that deal in the round, which is one of the reasons they've moved away from calling just for a ceasefire to actually this comprehensive peace deal, which is much more on Putin's terms in terms of what he wanted to happen first, is that you can throw in business elements, you can look at land swaps, and therefore if you accompany that with a serious security pact, saying that the US would get involved with Russia to go further than what had been agreed, I think that is how you start to take control of the situation. Now, there are going to be critics as to how this looks like if it gets over the line, but I think that does explain some of the US thinking, which is quite different to, I think, some of the European thinking, where they think Putin is just someone who you just can't really bring into the room.
Well, let's put that point then to Andrew. Look, Andrew, you're a former diplomat. You were based at the British Embassy in Moscow. Is there negotiation with Putin? He has been in power for decades. He feels like it certainly feels like the further east you go across Europe, that he is not moving anywhere. He is staying in power. Is there negotiation with him, or is it his way or the highway?
Katy is, of course, right that you have to take the world as it is, not as one would wish it to be. And she's right, absolutely, that Marco Rubio and others have been saying precisely that. I think the question is, what is the world like? Certainly, Putin has invaded Ukraine. That's a fact. The question is, what do you do? So you could indeed have a temporary peace agreement. Temporary can last an awfully long time sometimes. We've seen that in Europe before. But if you do that, and you do it in a way that Ukraine can't be a prospering sovereign country, then Ukraine will just fall apart, and European security will fall apart with it. If you do it in a way that Ukraine can prosper, and you don't, in law, agree that Russia has taken over the territory, but you de facto agree that they have taken over for now, maybe there's some kind of deal which can be done. The problem here is that you've set an incredibly dangerous precedent that the USA, the most important power in the world, is now accepting that borders can be changed by force, first of all. And secondly, there doesn't seem to be anything in what Marco Rubio or Steve Witkoff have been saying over the weekend which would deter Putin, because this Article 5 type guarantee is extremely vague. We're not at all sure what it means. Would deter Putin from coming back for more. And he has shown, to the point that the world has to be taken as it is, not as we would wish it, he's shown since 2008 in Georgia, 2014 in Ukraine, 2022 in Ukraine again, that he will not stop unless he is stopped.
On that note, we're going to leave it there. Andrew Levi, former diplomat who was based at the British Embassy in Moscow, also Katy Balls, Washington editor at the Sunday Times. Thank you very much for your contributions and your thoughts. Now, of course, a big day coming